New York Senator Chuck Schumer on Meet the Press saying we should proceed with caution in this country when it comes to nuclear power. Meanwhile, Connecticut's independent Senator Joe Lieberman claims what's happening in Japan should have us all stopping in our tracks, at least for the time being.
I think it calls on us here in the U.S. naturally not to stop building nuclear power plants, but to put the brakes on right now until we understand the ramifications of what's happened in Japan.
What happens next, Jamie?
I'm not sure what that means. Do we put the brakes on or do we proceed with I'm not sure. Look, here's the thing. I don't think what happens in Japan dictates what happens here. I think we should have always proceeded with caution on nuclear power. But when we're talking about global warming with the current technology, we have no choice but to include nuclear energy in our energy plan. Unfortunately, it's coal, it's oil, and it's nuclear power. And we can talk about wind and we can talk about solar, but we're not there yet with those energy proposals.
And before we proceed, I should mention that the mega panel is here. Jami Floyd, former Clinton policy advisor, Sam Cedar.
We need no introduction.
I just applied for this, and we have a lot to talk about. And Rick Lazio, former New York congressman. The numbers that strike me, whether I don't care whether you use nuclear, whether you use coal, whether you burn oil, the efficiency rate when we burn anything in this country is 34%. Meaning that 75% of every barrel of oil, 75% of every brick of coal, 75% of every piece of water over Niagara Falls, 75% of every time a windmill turbine turns. You get my point?
Yeah.
We burn it for no reason. And we seem to have a lot of arguments,
exactly
Sam,
right.
about sourcing. And there's a valid debate there. I find no debate in this country or no effort in this country to improve our efficiency ratios, where in Japan, by the way, their power generation is at 90% capture. Our power generation is at 33% capture. What has to happen in this country where we talk about the fact that we burn obscene sums of energy of all sorts for no reason?
Well, look, my biggest concern when we talk about nuclear is look at what happened in the Gulf. I mean, look at the regulatory capture we have in this country. If we're talking about giving billions of dollars, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of subsidies to build these things, where is the sense that we can trust our regulatory agencies? Where is the sense that we can trust industry to not cut corners? I mean, we have had example after example after example of industries like this cutting corners to the detriment of the public, to exposing the public to risks so that they can privatize the benefits of those cuts.
Rick, your thoughts on all of this?
I just think one of the biggest issues facing the world over the next 25, 35, 50 years is how we increase energy output per individual, especially as developing countries begin to grow. The demand for energy, for economic growth, for jobs, for political stability, which comes with all those things, is ever increasing. I think what happened here in Japan is going to slow the process down in America in terms of the two major issues: financing and siting of nuclear reactors. And we haven't had a commissioning since 1979. It takes over 10 years to that's right, 3 Mile Island. And this is one area where President Obama and congressional Republicans seem like they found common ground. Obama having, I think, $18 billion in the budget, looking for another $35 or $36 billion more for nuclear power construction. It supplies 1/5 of our energy, electrical energy here in America. So we've got to be safe, we've got to be sober, we've got to be scientific, we can't have hyperbole, but we've got to have enough production so our economy will supply the kind of jobs that we need.
And what do you say we just stop burning all this random energy for the sport of it?
No one ever talks about efficiency or reduction.
34% is humiliating. 34% is humiliating.
BP happened, and after that, no one's been talking about efficiency or reduction. Until your question, I've been listening all day. Your question's the first one I've heard about.
I mean, you don't hear from Republicans. Everybody's like, burn all you want. Just burn mine. Burn the oil. Don't burn the wind. Oh, burn all the wind you want, but don't burn any oil. Oh, burn all the oil. Anyway, let's move on to something else that's irritating, shall we? More fallout over the weekend in the growing scandal involving alleged WikiLeaker Bradley Manning and his treatment behind bars. State Department spokesperson P.J. Crowley now out of a job. He handed in his resignation just 3 days after criticizing Manning's living conditions, calling the Pentagon's actions, quote, ridiculous and stupid. Those comments, of course, prompting this unexpected exchange between Jake Tapper and the president on Friday.
State Department spokesman P.J. Crowley said the treatment of Bradley Manning by the Pentagon is ridiculous and counterproductive and stupid. And I'm wondering if you agree with that.
I can't go into details about some of their concerns, but some of this has to do with Private Manning's safety as well.
Well, the president's comments and Crowley's resignation only strengthening the resolve of Manning supporters. The group Code Pink taking their disgust straight to the nation's capital today with protests at both the State Department and the White House. The thing for me, Rick, that regardless of your feelings about Manning, is that there's a clear deviance from the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which says explicitly that an inmate is to be held up to the point at which they are no longer a danger to themselves and not beyond that point. It continues to bring up this concern that our federal government can treat a prisoner of any kind however they so choose, if they so choose to. Is that a valid?
Well, listen, what the president is saying and what the people in Guantanamo is saying is that he has...
Quantico. He's in Virginia.
Although
he might think he's in Guantanamo.
Maximum security prison.
Is that he has, in fact, indicated that he'd be a threat to himself. I mean, that's exactly the question posed to the president. The president's been looking at
the only problem
he
with
is saying that
is that the only people who are not saying it are the psychiatrists in Quantico, who are the ones who need to sign off on this type of thing. I mean, and I think it's a helpful coincidence that you said Guantanamo, because for those of us who were complaining about the way that we were treating prisoners down in Guantanamo, it's very hard to imagine that we get to the point where we're stripped naked, this guy Manning, without having done the type of shenanigans in Guantanamo.
Fundamental issue that basically we have two codes of justice in this country. We have the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and then we have the Civil Code of Justice. And basically a third class of prisoner was invented under the Bush administration when we went to Guantanamo. That third class of prisonership has been advanced and advocated by Barack Obama in his succeeding presidency, and we are now seeing the continued development and use of that third class of prisoner, which was never legislated, was never debated, was never what's going on in this country.
All correct. We have something else. We have something called the U.S. Constitution. Manning has not been convicted of anything.
He hasn't even been tried.
He hasn't even been tried. He's never been convicted of a crime, the one that he's charged with here or any other crime ever. And yet he has been stripped. He's in a maximum security prison. He has been held in solitary, not for days, not for weeks, but for months, which has been defined in other countries and at times by our own U.S. Supreme Court as torture. So forget Crowley. I don't really care about Crowley because he said a stupid thing and he works for the U.S. government, so he loses his job. So what? But Manning needs to be given his rights, and he's not being given his rights, and I think that's shameful.
Well, should we move to something
slightly less
irritating? I promise. This is less irritating because this is sports. So you got to do.
All right.
The question is, what do millionaire pro athletes have in common with public servants struggling to survive in middle-class America? A sneaky move by the NFL over the weekend, blaming the lockout on players who take for granted how good they have it. Without specifically mentioning all those teachers and firefighters in Wisconsin, the owners released this statement over the weekend, and I'll quote, they say, at a time when thousands of employees are fighting for their collective bargaining rights, this union has chosen to abandon collective bargaining in favor of a sham decertification and antitrust litigation. Critics argue any comparison is apples and oranges, and this is nothing more than a PR play. But do the owners have a point? Sam?
Look, the one thing that I find similar to this is you have a situation where millionaires and billionaires are taking advantage of people who are not millionaires and billionaires. A lot of these players are making $300,000 or $400,000 a year. Maybe they have a very short window of time where they can make that money. I don't blame them for decertifying. They got to take this to the courts. It's the only way they're going to get any type of redress.
Jamie?
It's hard to feel as much sympathy for these union members as I did for teachers in Wisconsin. But I think the analogy is fair. I do.
Rick.
Oh, come on. Tom Brady. I mean, he's really squeaking by. You know, these guys have multi-year contracts. Many of them, not all of them, starting people, many of them are making multi-million-dollar salaries. It's really hard to
one at a time. That was good.
That's why I brought Rick. One at a time.
Thank you for stirring the pot.
That's exactly why a guy like Tom Brady is showing a lot of solidarity, because he doesn't need that type of protection, but there are other players who do there. And this is a classic case. These players know they cannot last in a war of attrition against these millionaires and billionaires who own these teams. And it's the same situation that we have, a similar dynamic, whether it's in Wisconsin over the weekend where you have guys, or sanitation workers who work for $29,000 a year. They're looking to get a $19,000 a year pension, and they've worked for 22 years to get it, and now they're going to get ripped off.
Jamie.
And union busting is union busting. The philosophical underpinning is the same.
Let me just say,
Please.
Come on now. We're talking about fat cat professional football players
but not
that
fat
really
cat.
have their
Those guys
way.
are fat cats.
And I got to tell you,
then the billionaire owners can't even make it through a door.
and
They're
the
so
country,
fat.
the states, the country is going broke not because of multi-million-dollar
Are we looking at
salaries,
these
but
football owners
because
gonna give
we
us
don't
breaks
have the
on TV?
political
One at a
will to
time, one
actually
at a time.
address these issues.
Are these football
of moving
owners
to
going to give us a
defined
break on the
contribution
tickets?
plan.
This
I don't think
happens
so.
every single year, and I tell you, we will have an NFL season. The real question isn't whether we're going to have a shutdown of the season. The question is whether we're going to have a shutdown of the federal government.
Yeah, well, what if the players just form their own league?
Right, and their own network. It's
Everything.
really about the TV
Yeah.
dollar
Play in
billion.
China,
Yeah, what the heck?
right?
Well, I'll tell you something. It takes a lot of skill.
You need the players to play football.
That's right.
They
And
are the players.
I'm sure
They're
there's
the
some
ones who
other,
play football.
I'm sure there's some other millionaires out there that are willing
Would
to
love to
fund
hire
this.
them, yes.
That's right. I'm sure they'll get some type of tax break too.
Don't give them any ideas.
All right. Nice to see all three of you. Thank you very much. Sam Cedar, Rick Lazio,
Thank you for
Jami
having
Floyd.
me.